Our objectives for today are to differentiate between moral, legal, and ethical behaviors and to explain how those ethical behaviors impact business decisions. We'll also identify how organizations demonstrate social responsibility. We'll identify ethical issues that organizations face and define the process organizations use to establish a code of ethics to encourage ethical behavior. We'll compare and contrast major ethical theories, and we'll explain how stakeholders shape a business's approach to corporate social responsibility. So why does this matter? When we talk about introduction to business topics, why do we look at business ethics? First of all, it's to bring ethics to the front of our mind, so we can think about our actions more carefully, more critically, and avoid past mistakes. For example, the Ford Pinto case, General Motors case, in both those cases we see major automobile organizations that had employees that made a very quick decision about something with a big impact. Ultimately, the vehicles were not operating correctly. They should have been recalled. As a result of them not being recalled, we saw people face death, horrible injuries. And so it's important to think about the decisions you're making, the stakeholders, the people and organizations and communities impacted by those decisions, and just to think through some of the consequences of your actions. It's not an organization acting, it's the people behind it. We also want to recognize those consequences. The fact that we make these choices, there will be outcomes to them. And so there are individuals, you and I, making these choices even when they're kind of covered by these big companies. At General Motors and at Ford Pinto, there were still individuals who made the decision on behalf of the organization. You working as an employee or even owning your own organization, you want to be careful about the decisions you're making then as a result. We also talk about business ethics to understand there's not one right answer. We usually each have a very different perspective about what's right and what's wrong.
In a ceremony of humiliation, the FBI marched two handcuffed former WorldCom executives to court today. Former Chief Financial Officer Scott Sullivan and former Controller David Myers, together charged with trying to hide nearly $4 billion in expenses.
The defendants orchestrated a scheme to defraud the investing public by convincing them that WorldCom was meeting stock analyst expectations.
In fact, the now bankrupt telecom giant was losing money. Conspicuously absent from today's indictment parade was former CEO Bernie Evers, who took the fifth at Senate hearings last month.
Even though I do not believe I have anything to hide.
But the feds could be pressuring Sullivan to get at Evers, says white-collar crime expert John Coffey.
So it would be true to the usual game that they expect Mr. Sullivan to flip and cooperate against Mr. Evers.
Asked whether the WorldCom case was now closed, Attorney General John Ashcroft issued a sharp
No.
Ashcroft took center stage today to send a message.
Corrupt corporate executives are no better than common thieves when they betray their employees and steal from their investors.
The arrests come just 2 weeks before the CEOs of America's biggest companies must personally sign off on their corporate numbers. Coffey believes it's no coincidence.
All of those people will be certifying in 2 weeks, knowing that Scott Sullivan, the Chief Financial Officer of WorldCom, faces a decade or more in prison for doing what they're asked to certify that they are not doing.
So we see in that video, and I'm going to zoom in here, some of the issues that can happen at major organizations. Throughout history, we see an example of what we saw featured in the video, WorldCom, right before the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, which we'll talk about more throughout this course. Right before it came out, requiring, as you heard in the video, executives to sign off on it, really that they understand their financial statements, that they've seen them, they recognize them, so they can't say, oh, I don't know what that is. So we see a lot of organizations like WorldCom, like Enron, who really have been involved in these corporate scandals, whether they're acting in a legal way or not. The law is the floor, it's the minimum, it's what we must do. Ethics is what we should do. And so we see how these decisions can impact an organization and ultimately lead to its demise by making bad choices that hurt its stakeholders. WorldCom is just one example of that. Others you might hear about are Enron, Tyco, some big ones that came out around 2000, 2001, resulting in that Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, which now has legal requirements to help regulate some of this poor conduct. So let's talk about the difference between moral, ethical, and legal behavior. As I just mentioned, the law is what we must do. I like to call it the floor. Whereas ethics are what we should do. It's going above and beyond to do what you believe is right. And again, what we think is right may differ from the person next to us. So one of the questions I like to talk about with my students when I talk about business ethics is this idea of whether or not there is such a thing of business ethics. There are some people that will say that this term is actually an oxymoron, that you cannot have businesses that are ethical. Now, when I ask students about this, there'll be comments like, yeah, you have to do what you got to do to make money. And it's not about that. When we talk about business ethics, a business is just an entity. It's not a person like you or I, but it has a lot of the same types of rights and obligations. So a good example of that, when McDonald's shows up in court, who comes? Now, you might say lawyers, you might say employees, you might say, hey, Ronald McDonald's showing up. Well, that's not the case. Ronald McDonald is not going to show up to represent McDonald's. It's people like you and me who work for those companies that have to be there in court taking responsibility for their actions. So while McDonald's ends up in the news for doing the wrong thing, it's usually a group of individuals that made those bad choices on behalf of the organization, ultimately acting in an unethical way. That's why you and me and anybody involved in an organization really need to think about business ethics and decide what are the priorities and what are the decisions you should make to align with those priorities. Now, when we talk about business ethics, we're really thinking about the standards of conduct and moral values that govern those actions and decisions then in the work environment. As I mentioned, different businesses have different priorities, and so making decisions that align with those priorities is what a business will call its ethics. Businesses have to balance those priorities. You have to balance doing what's right with making a profit. You know, if you do not have a profit as a business, you'll no longer be able to be functioning. You can't be donating money to those in need or doing nice things for other people or paying your employees more if your business does not exist to do so. So it's a balance. An example of this balance is Tom's. And you'll see Tom's on the screen here. And a little quick introduction. Again, if you'd like to watch further, you can.
What if I started a shoe company, and every time I sold a pair of shoes, I gave a pair away? And that way, if as long as I continue to keep selling shoes, these kids will have shoes for the rest of their life.
As you see featured in the video, Blake McCuskey started this organization called Tom's as an example of balancing what's profitable with doing what's right. The organization sells shoes. Okay, but the point, as I'm zooming in here so you can see a little more about it, they've made a commitment to match every pair of Tom's shoes purchased with a new pair given to someone in need. As you saw in the video, the idea of that is this one-for-one concept. Now, it's not that it's a nonprofit organization. They still hope to make a profit, but they're also trying to align their values, the heart of the business, their mission, with some good ethical conduct, which we might refer to as corporate social responsibility. While they're still hoping to gain that profit, they may make less money by having to give away two shoes, two pairs of shoes. It's double the expense with only one actual sale, one revenue, one form of money coming in for that. And now you can make an argument, oh, well, they'll make more money because this brand, their brand then has this goodwill and people will go, oh, they're doing what's right and so I want to buy from them. But ultimately, it's costing them a little more. to provide that money for the shoes. They're getting one sale and then they're having to donate another pair of shoes. And there is a cost with that. So they're balancing. We're doing what's right and we're still able to maintain a profit in doing so. And they've been growing and doing very well. Moving on to social responsibility. There's a difference between business ethics and social responsibility. Here, this is the management's acceptance that they have an obligation to consider profit, but also consumer satisfaction and the societal well-being of equal value when evaluating the firm's performance. So it's more than just, hey, I need to make as much money as possible. Sometimes it's about, I need to pay my employees a little more. I need to make sure I'm not polluting the community that I'm a part of. And I need to make sure that I'm treating my customers right, doing what's right for them. So it's a balancing act of that profit with those different stakeholders. Stakeholders being those people, those communities, those organizations who are impacted by the business, whether it's good or bad way. So to whom do businesses have responsibilities? Who are these stakeholders? You'll see generally these two competing theories out in the business field. The first is what we call the shareholder model. This is something that Milton Friedman really presented, and it focuses on the idea that an organization's goal is simply to maximize profits. It's about making money. You need to do so while obeying the law. So you have to not engage in any illegal conduct. You need to follow the law, but you don't necessarily have to go beyond that. Again, the law is the floor. You might not always do what you should do. You might pay your employees the bare minimum instead of a little more to make their living situation a little better. But you're maximizing profits in doing that, and you're following your obligations under the law. To some managers, this shareholder model is what they believe is their form of ethics. Okay? And that can be ethical. It is ethical to this type of model to maximize profits and obey the law. And some people will say that's an ethical form of corporate social responsibility. If you want more information, you can actually look at the 1970 New York Times Magazine article where Friedman talks more about this concept. Just remember there's two parts to this. You need to obey the law while maximizing profits. And again, that is what some people would argue is ethical conduct in an organization. So it's not like, hey, this organization's unethical because they're maximizing profits and obeying the law, but they're not doing anything else. No, they really will feel strongly that they are acting ethically by maximizing profits. An example of this, if ABC Company decides to give away, $10,000 to Montgomery College to offer scholarships to students, the idea here is that that's taking money that should have been in the investors' pockets and donating it to these students for scholarships. Those investors may not even think that that's a good donation to be made. And so what this shareholder model would say is give that money, give those profits you should be maximizing for your investors, give it to them. And then if they want to donate money, if they want to provide a scholarship, let them do so. It's not the business's decision. Now, there are competing theories. Remember, perspectives vary on this. The more common model that's being followed by businesses today is what we call the stakeholder model. Rather than this focus of the shareholder model just on the investors, the shareholders, people who have some kind of stake in the profit of the business, the stakeholder model looks beyond that. Okay, so it includes the shareholders, it includes the investors, but it also includes the general public, customers, employees, the community, anyone impacted in a good or bad way by the business. Again, that's what we call a stakeholder. Be careful not to confuse a stakeholder, which is anyone impacted by the business, with a shareholder, which is just one stakeholder in many. Okay? Under this model, it's not just about profits, it's also about considering these other groups. Now we're also going to talk about how ethical behavior impacts business decisions today. Try to take a moment and think about a recent example where a company may have behaved unethically to your standards. Now I want to share an example with you of a major organization today that most would agree did not behave ethically, mainly because we see laws broken here. They haven't even met that bare minimum. And then beyond that, they really didn't think about what they should be doing. As I mentioned at the start of this presentation, the Ford Pinto case was long ago. We see elements of that kind of roll up again in this General Motors case, which is much more recent. Here we see General Motors, which is one of the world's largest automakers, recall 30.4 million cars and trucks. They acknowledged they knew about this problem that was going on with the ignition switches, resulting in multiple deaths for more than a decade before they actually made these recalls. So a bunch of people are sitting around a room, they hear this idea that, hey, our cars are having issues with the ignition, and it's a type of issue that could result in injury or death. The cost to fix that was a matter of cents. Okay, while it varies, it was under $1 to make that ignition switch fix, and the people in the room, people like you and like me, made a decision to not do the fix. They did a calculation, as was the case with Ford Pinto, decided the recall could hurt their brand. People could be concerned about the safety of their vehicles, and that the injuries that were possible were minimal enough that it wasn't worth alerting the general public about a recall and risking that safety causing harm to the company's stock and to the company as a whole. Now, to kind of bring this to light in a fun way, I'm going to show you a clip from Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. This is a show that's featured on HBO. However, a lot of clips from it will be available on YouTube. They provide a little feedback on news throughout the week. And so it's a nice way to get a summary of the news in an engaging format if you're someone who doesn't like to watch the news. So there's also more information if you click on this link if you want to learn more about these recalls. I'm going to click on the video now to show you a quick clip.
Just this Friday, we learned that GM was holding meetings at the time about dealing with their defective cars, but you'll never guess what they were talking about.
These are slides from a PowerPoint presentation given in 2008. Workers were told not to use the word defect or defective, but rather does not perform to design. And GM had judgment words that were banned, including dangerous, crippling, life-threatening, hobbling, and 65 others.
How did they even come up with that list? Was it just word association at that point? Okay, everyone, say the first word that comes to mind. Cadillac XDS. Life-threatening. Perfect. The new Chevy Sonic. Crippling and dangerous. Fantastic. Keep them going. There are no bad ideas here, just bad cars. And there were a lot more words on that list than just those four mentions, because the banned words include, and I'm going to show you the document to prove that they are real as I read them. They include death trap, decapitating, grenade-like, Hindenburg, Kevorkian-esque, powder keg, rolling sarcophagus, and your toast. When demons have sex, those are their safe words. We don't technically have commercial breaks on this show, but frankly, after this, I think we all might just need one just to get away from this story altogether. So if you'll excuse us, we'll be right back.
General Motors makes cars that America can be proud of. Cars you could never describe as defective or catastrophically flawed. Gruesome, potentially disfiguring golden sarcophagi? That's not our cars. We make sleek, non-grenade-like anti-chemicals that are the very opposite of Kevorkian-esque. So why not tell your family you love them and come test drive a GM car today? Driving a GM car is so smooth, it's like butter. And your toast. General Motors. Why walk through the valley of the shadow of death when you can run?
So again, we're going to talk about a lot of different things in this class. When we introduce you to a lot of topics, I try to show some video clips of things that might interest you, as well as provide links to more information. So feel free to access the Prezi if you want to learn more about that General Motors recall. Now moving on to the environment of a business, companies are focusing on this idea of sustainability, so operating in ways that have less environmental impact and also replacing used resources. The sustainable type of conduct really helps to eliminate waste and ultimately then to help profits in an organization. If you're able to reuse and recycle, you can save some money. On top of that, your stakeholders might like that, consumers might like seeing that social responsibility type of factor for the business. And It can be something where you're providing less impact to the environment as a whole in a negative way, which some people also don't like to see, keeping consumers in mind. I have H&M here as just one example of a company working toward a more sustainable future. They have a program called H&M Conscious. One of the parts of this program, for example, if you click on the link, you'll learn more information about H&M. They are providing the opportunity to recycle clothing, clothes you're not wearing anymore. They give you an incentive to do this. They do offer you a discount off their clothes, but it helps to make sure that they're using those materials, that they're being recycled, and they're able to offer more low-cost options and provide clothing then to those in need. Again, if you're interested in learning more, you can watch the video or click on the link for more information. Now, in terms of government regulation, I mentioned earlier in our video this law called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. Some people refer to it as the SOX Act. Scandals like Enron and like WorldCom, where you saw a clip of earlier on, these huge organizations that had some really bad stuff going on that maybe legally was okay at the time, but ethically was not what they should have been doing, resulting in the companies, going bankrupt, then hurting people who had stock in the organizations, hurting employees who had been with the company for a long time, and really just causing a lot of fraud and corruption that were not in the interest of the employees, the workers, the shareholders of the organization as a whole. And so it's one of these things where, unfortunately, the law is very reactive. They had this law now as a result that helps prevent this type of bad conduct in these major organizations, requiring more disclosure and more auditing and more regulation of the business as a whole. But at the time, that just wasn't the case. And while people could have been doing the right thing, they were not legally required to do so. So those are some of the Enron and WorldCom, Tyco, some of the major ones you'll hear about. And we want to make sure we don't repeat that conduct, so they'll often be studied in your business courses. Now, I'm going to show you a quick clip today. This is from The Smartest Guys in the Room, which is a documentary on Enron, another large organization went bankrupt very quickly within a year. In this scandal, what was happening is that they were using what we call mark-to-market accounting. A really quick way to explain that is that they were saying, hey, we got this new client or this new product, and so we think there'll be $1 million in revenue coming in, so we're going to go ahead and book that. Instead, there was a lot of debt, and they never realized that profit. As a result, they were hiding that debt. And so to stockholders like you or me, it looked like the company was doing very well. It was very admired. It was a great company. And so we were investing our money and thinking the stock shares are, valuable and it's a good thing. And then suddenly you find out, hey, they're actually not very profitable. And in fact, there's tons of debts they're hiding from the public. And so that resulted in the company eventually going bankrupt. And again, it harmed the many stakeholders and the employees, investors, etc. So this is a quick clip about that scandal. If you're interested in learning more, this is a nice film to kind of see this scandal and different aspects of it.
It had taken Enron 16 years to go from about 10 billion of assets to 65 billion of assets. It took 24 days to go bankrupt.
The fatal flaw at Enron was pride, arrogance, intolerance.
Well, you guys stole from those poor grandmothers.
We can add a gazillion dollars to the bottom line.
All right, that sounds fantastic.
Did you convert stock worth $66 million?
I don't know. I netted approximately $100 million.
Enron is a company that deals with everyone with absolute integrity.
Talking about my compensation, if I step on somebody's throat on the way, that doubles it. I'll also stomp on the guy's throat.
The other thing about people at Enron is a lot of them were former nerds. You wanted to be the most popular guy on Wall Street, and you were going to do whatever you had to do.
They sought out every loophole they could in order to profit.
The rules weren't quite clear.
They could bury debt, they could bury losses.
An industry that was very reliable for 100 years was all of a sudden turned into a casino.
Those guys could just yank the healthy economy on its leash whenever they wanted to. And did it.
Could I predict phony energy prices as a result of deregulation? Yes. Could I predict that Tom Schwarzenegger would get a governor as a result of deregulation? Oh, I didn't expect that.
How exactly does Enron make its money?
Accounting doesn't get that creative.
I would like to know if you are on track.
This is the shredded evidence that came out of it.
Everyone was
we were on the side of angels.
So we look at examples of this type of bad ethical behavior that impacted organizations in a major way, like we see with Enron, like we see with WorldCom, to try to avoid those same types of mistakes recurring. So hopefully by taking a quick look at these organizations and hopefully diving deeper if it interests you, you'll see the type of reason why ethics has become so important in the business field. Now, another thing we need to look at is this idea of a code of conduct. This is really important. It's a formal statement that basically defines how an organization expects its workers to resolve ethical questions. Johnson & Johnson is a large company which has this credo it's had for many, many years, and it's a great example of a code of conduct. Everyone in the organization has to know these values, and it helps them to understand what should they put first. For one organization, it might be profit. For others, like Johnson & Johnson, it's going to be this idea of honesty and disclosure and making sure they treat people right. So for example, when Johnson & Johnson had this issue with Tylenol, they had to do a major recall of that medicine. There was issues with it. They were very honest and they released the information to the public. They said they made a mistake and they fixed it. And that was because they were following the values of Johnson & Johnson's credo, their formal code of conduct. There are other ways to help encourage ethical behavior. Outside groups can evaluate businesses and disclose results to the public as another way to show how the business is engaging in ethical conduct. Social audits are also these more formal procedures that identify and evaluate company activities as they relate to different societal issues. So for example, they might look into how much they're paying their employees and if there are large gaps between different types of genders, different races, etc. Now there are 4 different kind of categories you can put ethical challenges into. And you'll see those on the screen now. I'm going to just zoom in here so you can see it a little better. So the 4 areas we talk about are these ideas of a conflict of interest, honesty and integrity, whistleblowing, and issues of loyalty versus truth. Now the first area, a conflict of interest, is a situation where a business decision may be influenced for personal gain. Okay, so for example, if a professor of yours decides to write their own textbook and then uses that same textbook and requires students to use it in class, some would say it's a conflict of interest. It might be that it's the best textbook out there, but requiring students to use that textbook when you might have some kind of personal bias attached to it because you created it, and it might somehow benefit you, you might get some type of profit by the number of books sold, that's a great example of what a conflict of interest could be. Now in business, sometimes that's not even that there is a conflict of interest, it's just the perception that there might be. I worked for Deloitte Consulting, and working for them, in their federal practice, even just having a meeting with a federal client, a friend that I might want to see, even if there's no business going on, there's nothing sketchy going on, just the idea that you're having lunch together can give the appearance like there's some type of conflict of interest. Like that federal employee might be doing business with Deloitte simply because of that personal relationship and not because they're the best contractor for the job. So a conflict of interest, when you're trying to figure out if an ethical challenge is a conflict of interest, think about, is there something that either looks like they're making a decision based on something more personal, some type of bias, rather than the right quality, the right qualifications for a job? Or does it look like that, or is that actually happening? And that's a good example of a conflict of interest. Now, while it's related, there's this idea of honesty and integrity as well. Of course, you want to be honest, but even being honest and telling you, hey, I'm just having lunch, there's no incentive to this federal worker to give me a contract because I'm having lunch with them, it's still a conflict of interest because it looks like it could be a problem, because there could be a problem. Honesty and integrity is more this focus on just telling the truth, okay, adhering to really deeply felt ethical principles while making those business decisions. Okay, so being honest, doing what's right, and you'll hear this as an important component for employees at many organizations. Okay, they want people that have a good moral character, that are thinking about their decisions and how they impact others, and trying to do what's right for them as well as balancing what's right for the organization. Being honest, fully disclosing will really help with that. When we talk about honesty and integrity, one good example of that is when you show up late to work. If you're getting paid an hourly wage from 9 to 5, let's say $20 an hour, you're getting paid those 8 hours at $20 an hour. Okay, your employer is paying you. They're paying you to work, and they agreed on a rate that works for you. And if you show up half an hour late, really they shouldn't have to pay you that extra $10. It's not fair to them. Okay, just like if they asked you to work an extra half hour, to work 8.5 hours instead, you would argue, hey, it's not fair unless you pay me. So it's really important to be honest in an organization, even when it comes down to small things that you might not think are a big deal. Showing up late every day and lying about it can be. I'm going to go over here to loyalty versus truth for just a moment. Okay, again, you can see elements of this in some of the other categories we talked about. But the idea here is that business people expect employees to be loyal and to be truthful. But keep in mind, ethical conflicts arise. So using that same example I provided, imagine you're not the one coming late, but your friend is, your friend Zoe. She shows up 15 minutes late every day, and you know this. She's your friend, though, and you don't want to report her conduct. The boss comes up to you and asks you, hey, where's Zoe? I thought she was supposed to be here at 8, it's 8:15, do you know where she's at? And you lie for her because you're trying to be loyal to Zoe. That's not being loyal to the organization. Okay? And of course, when you've been working with people a lot of hours and over sometimes a long period, many, many years, it can be hard not to support. Like, hey, Zoe's late and it's because she ran out to grab something for the business. While you might want to help your friend, you also have to be honest, and you don't want to put yourself in a bad place. Usually a good friend wouldn't ask you to do that. Okay, but of course these conflicts are not always so easy to resolve because of that, because you have loyalties to different groups, different organizations. The last ethical challenge we'll talk about is this concept of whistleblowing. My students always joke and they say snitch. Whatever helps you remember this, but the formal word is whistleblowing. And here the idea is that you are reporting unethical or illegal conduct that might be going on in an organization. Okay, so if you see any of the types of ethical challenges we just talked about, you should be saying something. So my next question on the screen here is if you've ever faced an issue like this, either at work or at school. It might just be that you see someone at the office stealing pens or Post-it notes. It's still taking money and property away from the business, even if it seems small to you. If everyone's stealing pens and Post-it notes, that adds up. So a good example I like to share with my students is this activity called David Geffen Lies on a Resume. And I like to use this one because we all need resumes to move forward in our careers. Most of us are in school to try to get a better job. And so a resume is a really important part of that. And the resume, lying on it, is something, unfortunately, that's really common. There's different numbers around it, 80% or more, but the majority of resumes, there's exaggerations and just not truthful information on. So because of that, I like to share this example of David Geffen. He was trying to get a job, and he claims to be the cousin of a famous record producer, Phil Spector. Of course, this wasn't true. Although he'd met him, the claim did get him an interview, though. So he appears in a suit and tie, which you should always do. And he has a resume that claims he has a degree from UCLA. He gets the job, but with a scare from this new trainee later on that had lied on their application, he decides to conspire. His brother helps him, and they counterfeit a letter that confirms the fact that he has a degree to try to save his job. Now, if you think about his story, think about what you would do as a manager. You have an employee who lies on their resume. They say they have a degree, but they don't. However, they've been working with you for 5 years, and they've been successful. They're a rock star employee, great value to your business. It'd be hard for you to lose them because they've been bringing in so much profits. They're good with customers, but you find out they lied. They said they had a degree that they didn't actually have. If you think about it, you put so much time and energy and money into obtaining a degree. You guys are working on that right now. And here you have someone who just added that line to their resume and took a job away that could have been yours. Still, the way you might handle the situation varies. I've done this with students in many classes. I've done this with high-level executives in leadership trainings, and I get varying responses. I'll tell you, most of the executives that I've worked with, when I give them this scenario, they tend to fire the person. They really value that idea of honesty and integrity, and they're very worried about what we call the slippery slope. If one person's lying and getting away with it, what else might go around with other employees? And while you can try to keep it quiet, most information gets out there. Other students sometimes say, who cares if they lied? You got to do what you got to do to get a job. And I don't love that, because it does take away opportunities from people who are working really hard to try to obtain a position, and it isn't necessarily honest. But still, whether or not you'd actually fire an individual over that, it's tough, especially when they're a rock star employee that's doing really well. So I tend to see students more often not wanting to fire the individual, but providing some type of penalty, requiring them to get a degree, requiring some type of training, requiring a demotion. Okay? And so we see varying responses to the same ethical challenge. In the business field, this happened at Yahoo. The top executive there lied on their resume, said they had a degree they didn't have, and they got fired. So if you want to ask me my advice on it, I usually tell students, why lie? Why put yourself in that position? Because nowadays, with the internet and so much communication at fingertips, you don't want to end up with your face on something. Even if you didn't really do something, when I type your name into Google, if that's what's popping up, that's not going to help your job search. It's a good idea to just be honest on your resume. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the different perspectives then. Now we've talked about how people would handle that lying on the resume in different ways. There are actually major ethical theories out there, and you want to try to think about which one you might align with best. The first is what we call utilitarian ethics. This was formed by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. They wrote this idea a long time ago in the 1800s. A correct decision under this theory is one that tends to maximize overall happiness and minimize overall pain. If you are someone who likes to make a pros and cons list and look out the pros outweighing the cons to make a positive decision, if you do risk management or cost-benefit analyses, it's a mathematical approach to ethics. You are following these utilitarian principles. Sometimes people will use the quote, "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. How can we help more people overall?" Okay, so I'll give you a quick clip to show you an example of that and help illustrate this concept. So that famous clip that you just saw of Star Trek is a good example of this idea of the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few. And if you have this one person who you really care about, it's your significant other, and they're going to lose their life, you might want to save that one person, but if you could save 10 others instead, under utilitarianism, they'd hope that you would save the 10 rather than that one, because you're saving more rather than less. Okay, it's a very mathematical approach. And depending on your own opinion, it may or may not support your ethical decisions. Now, under deontological ethics, it's very different. Here, the results are not as important. Here, they're looking more at your reasons for making them. This is something by Immanuel Kant, where many businesses actually take part in socially responsible acts, but people might say that they're not socially responsible because it's not about the outcome. It's not about the fact that you gave a large donation to an organization. And what they care about is your reasons for doing it. Did you give the donation out of sole altruistic, you're doing it out of the goodness of your heart, or did you do it because it'll help bring in more customers if they see you making donations to those in need? The next theory we're going to discuss is what we call the social justice theory. Under the social justice theory, members of society should be given goods according to their needs. There's a social contract that says people ought to follow the rules of society and accept its burdens because they have accepted the benefits from it as well. This idea of distributive justice, then, is something that helps us under social justice theory. It's about how we make decisions to do what's right. Okay, what is the fair way to distribute goods among a group? So imagine I decide to get pizza. And I decide to get pizza for everybody in a class. There's 30 students. I get 4 pizzas. Now, do we give each student a slice of pizza? Or do we give 2 to the person that missed lunch and they're very, very, very hungry? Or do we do it based on hunger? Or do we do it based on everyone getting the same amount of pizza? That's this idea of distributive justice. What do we think is the right way to distribute a resource? Another ethical theory is what's known as the virtue theory. This emphasizes the value of virtuous qualities, rather than rules or useful results even. Aristotle is actually recognized as the first philosopher to advocate the ethical value of certain qualities you might have in your character. or virtues, which is where virtue theory comes from. There are 14 virtues that he mentions, things like having courage, things like being friendly, being modest, justice, being gentle, being truthful. These 14 virtues you see on the screen are what can make someone ethical under this theory. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about how stakeholders shape a business's approach to corporate social responsibility. You'll see on the screen equal employment opportunities. And I'm just going to zoom in here for you. One of the major laws we'll learn more about when we talk about employment law toward the end of the course is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is what outlawed discriminatory practices. Title VII of this act specifically prohibits discrimination in the workplace. Sexual harassment falls under that and violates the Civil Rights Act. It protects both men and women. It refers to any type of unwelcome or inappropriate actions of a sexual nature in the workplace. Either quid pro quo, meaning you do something for me, I'll do something for you. You go on a date with me, I'll give you the schedule you want. Or hostile work environment. Overall, just an environment that makes you uncomfortable. You've told someone to stop making comments about their sex life, and yet they continue to do so. Now, as a result of the Civil Rights Act, they created what's called the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. And this was created to increase job opportunities for women, minorities, and really to help end discrimination. Now, it's still here today, but discrimination based on race, color, religion, disability, gender, national origin, or really any type of personnel action is protected under this law, under the Civil Rights Act, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is there to help support that. They provide free legal counsel as needed to help make sure that this conduct is prevented and to help provide consequences to those who engage in it. Another law similar to the Civil Rights Act protects against discrimination for people who are 40 or older. It's known as the ADEA, the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. And again, it protects a group that may be experiencing discrimination. There are companies that have been letting people go who are older than 40. They might be making more money because they've been with the organization longer, or they didn't grow up in an age with computers and maybe they're not as tech savvy, but they do bring a lot of other great experience to the organization. Still, the company decides, hey, this person's a health risk, I can hire 2 people for the same cost, get more work out, and they've been letting someone 40 or older go to replace them with some younger employees and hopefully be able to pay less. It's not fair to the individuals who have been there for a long time, and they do have a lot to offer, and so we have a law to help protect against that. Now, in respecting cultural diversity, you'll see a lot of organizations actually have diversity programs, allowing women, minorities, people who have any type of physical challenges to work in, and really a lot of organizations try to advertise this, like, hey, we like diversity in our organization, and there's research that will even show diversity can help make a team more effective. With most organizations working in teams, that's a great thing. However, while they might say they embrace diversity, it might just kind of be them saying it. So be careful. You don't know if just because they have a program, if everyone will still treat you the way you want to be treated. Organizations also are responding to environmental concerns. There's a growing focus in finding more renewable sources of clean energy and developing sustainable agriculture, for example. You'll see a lot of organizations making efforts to, again, reduce waste and reuse and recycle, as we talked about earlier with sustainability. Now, another element of ethics in business is this idea of providing a safe workplace and safe products. Under the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, you'll see that a set of safety and health standards were established in businesses to help make sure that there's not an unsafe environment in the workplace. For example, when I was a manager at AT&T some time ago, one of the things I had to look at to make sure it was a safe workplace was that on the ceiling in the inventory room, that the phones were not stacked so high that they were blocking where the water would come out if there was a fire. A small thing, but it would help provide a safer workplace. Now, we talked about the Ford Pinto case and the General Motors case earlier in this overview. Product liability is another issue that businesses need to be aware of. So responsibility of a business for injuries and damages caused by their products, whether they intended them or not. If you as a business build a car that goes on fire, as you see in the screen, as you've heard with the Ford Pinto, or an ignition switch that does not work, as you've heard with General Motors, you're going to be held strictly responsible whether you intended to hurt someone or not. Now, corporate philanthropy is a term you should be familiar with. This is any type of donation that a corporation provides in the form of cash. It might be free equipment, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Microsoft, providing computers to a college. Or it could be employee volunteer efforts. There might be a day that everybody goes out and helps clean up trash in the community. You'll see an example of that on the screen with Merck, who developed a drug and actually gave it to those who needed it because there wasn't really a market for it, but it was still a cure for a very tough disease. Now, cause-related marketing is another important term. You might see this come up on an assessment. This is something that talks about firms aligning their advertising with charitable giving and corporate sponsorships. So, for example, you can see on the screen the Yoplait Lid Save Lives initiative. That's one example. Another example I like to share in terms of a cause-related marketing is Dawn soap. When there was the BP oil spill, they used Dawn soap to clean it up, and they advertised that. Okay, and so that helps align with their mission. They're showing, hey, we're helping this cause, we're helping clean up these animals who were impacted by the oil spill, and by the way, see our product here. You'll get $1 off by using Dawn. And so that helps show that they care, and they're caring about something that aligns with their mission. Just like with Microsoft, if they provided computers to schools, Microsoft being such a computer and technology organization, it's aligning their giving with something that kind of goes down to their business. Now, we've learned a lot today about ethics in business. Again, remember our key takeaways. Keep ethics in the forefront of your mind. Think about the consequences of your actions to various stakeholders. Okay, try to remember that your decisions do have consequences, and that your decision in handling an ethical problem and challenge may be different than the person next to you. Thank you for learning more about business ethics.